Some people will only respect you the moment you stop needing them. Remember that. I am Gerald Beaumont, 67 years old, retired electrician, Vietnam veteran's son, and the kind of man who spent 40 years believing that family was everything. Right up until the evening my son's wife sat across from me at my own dinner table, folded her hands like she was chairing a board meeting and told me to hand over my life savings, or pack my bags. I want you to stay with me here, because what happened next changed everything. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. Let me back up. After my wife Carol passed 3 years ago, Marcus, that's my son, sat beside me at her funeral, held my shoulder and said, "Dad, you're not going through this alone. Move in with us. We have the space." I believed him. I sold the house Carol and I had shared for 31 years. I didn't take much. A few boxes of clothes, her photo on the nightstand, and $214,000 in savings I had built over a lifetime of early mornings and busted knuckles. I moved into Marcus and Tanya's spare room, and for the first 8 months things were fine. Not warm, not wonderful, just fine. The kind of fine where you eat dinner together but nobody really talks. The kind of fine where you say good morning and someone responds with a nod. The kind of fine that is one bad day away from falling apart completely. That bad day arrived on a Tuesday. I had just come in from the backyard. I'd been fixing their leaking garden faucet, something the plumber had quoted them $340 to repair. I washed my hands, poured myself a glass of iced tea, and sat down at the kitchen table. Tanya walked in, pulled out the chair directly across from me, and sat down with the energy of someone who had been rehearsing this moment in the shower for weeks. "Gerald," she said. "No dad, no warmth. Just Gerald." I looked up. "We need to talk about the financial arrangement in this house." I set my glass down slowly. "What arrangement?" I said. "I fix everything that breaks, I buy my own groceries, and I stay out of your way." "What exactly needs talking about?" She didn't even blink. "You live here free," she said. "No rent, no utilities, no contribution. And you're sitting on over $200,000. Now, I want you to notice something." She knew the number. She knew it exactly, which means my son, my own son, had told her. I kept my voice steady. "That money is my retirement, Tanya. That's what Carol and I spent 30 years saving. And this house," she said, spreading her hands like a real estate agent, "is what Marcus and I spend every month maintaining. So here's what we're proposing. You contribute $100,000 toward the mortgage, as a household investment." I stared at her. "Or," she added, and I promise you she said this without flinching, "you find somewhere else to live." The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the faucet I just fixed dripping once in the backyard. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I picked up my iced tea, finished it slowly, rinsed the glass, placed it in the drying rack, and walked to my room. I heard her call after me, "Gerald, we should finish this conversation." But I had already decided the conversation was over. That night I sat on the edge of my bed with Carol's photo in my hands and said out loud, "Well, sweetheart, looks like it's time to go." I could almost hear her laughing. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Because I want you to stay with me. I didn't storm out the next morning. No. I am 67 years old, and I did not survive 4 decades of skilled labor, 1 cardiac scare, and 31 years of marriage by making emotional decisions at midnight. I waited 3 days. I called my old friend Russell, who knew a realtor. The realtor, a no-nonsense woman named Beverly, sent me 4 listings by Thursday morning. By Friday afternoon, I had walked through a neat single-story 2-bedroom house on Clover Hill Lane, 12 minutes across town. It needed some cosmetic work. The kitchen faucet was loose. 2 porch boards were soft. The back fence leaned like it had given up on life entirely. I stood on that porch, looked out at a quiet street lined with oak trees, and felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Peace. I made an offer that afternoon. Cash. No contingencies. Beverly called me back in 2 hours and said, "Gerald, it's yours. I want you to hold on to that word. Yours. Because at 67 years old, having something truly yours, something no one can ask you to hand over or get out of, feels like oxygen after being underwater." I told Marcus that evening. He was standing in the kitchen eating leftover pasta when I walked in and said, I found a place. I'll be out by the end of the month. He turned around slowly. Dad, I'm not angry, I said, and I meant it. But I'm not handing over my savings, and I'm not staying somewhere I'm not wanted. So I bought a house. He opened his mouth and closed it, then said, and this is the part I will never forget. He said, "It was just a suggestion, Dad. Tanya didn't mean it like that." I looked at my son for a long moment. This man I had coached through Little League, driven to prom, sat beside in the hospital when his appendix nearly killed him at 19. "Marcus," I said quietly. She gave me an ultimatum at my own dinner table. The one I fixed the faucet under. We both know what she meant. He looked at his pasta. I went to my room and started packing. Moving day was a cold Saturday in March. I didn't hire movers. Russell came with his pickup truck, and we loaded my boxes in 2 hours. Tanya stayed in the bedroom the entire time. Marcus carried one box to the truck, then stood in the driveway with his hands in his pockets while I did the rest. Right before I climbed into Russell's truck, Marcus said, "You didn't have to do this, you know." I put on my seatbelt and said, "Neither did she." Russell pulled out of the driveway. I didn't look back. I spent my first night on Clover Hill Lane, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, and no television, no noise, no tension walking through the hallway. Just oak trees and street lights, and the sound of the neighborhood settling into the night. And then from the porch next door a voice said, calm, slightly amused, completely unbothered, "You the one who bought the Henderson place?" I turned. She was sitting in a rocking chair I hadn't noticed, wrapped in a yellow cardigan, holding what appeared to be a very serious cup of tea. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "Gerald Beaumont." She nodded slowly, looked me up and down the way someone does when they're deciding whether you're worth talking to. Pearson, she said finally. "Fair warning, I keep odd hours. I have strong opinions about lawn maintenance, and I make the best peach cobbler on this street." I smiled for the first time in what felt like months. "Gerald Beaumont," I said again, because somehow I felt like she deserved to hear it twice. She raised her teacup toward me like a toast, and just like that, without any warning whatsoever, my new life began. Stay with me, because in part 2, Pearson is about to turn everything upside down. And Marcus? Marcus is about to discover exactly what he lost the day he let his wife talk to his father like that. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely. Here's something nobody tells you about starting over at 67. It doesn't feel like starting over. It feels like finally arriving, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The first full week on Clover Hill Lane, I kept to myself. That's just my nature. I unpacked slowly, fixed the kitchen faucet on day 1, because apparently I cannot enter a house without immediately locating what's broken. Replaced the 2 soft porch boards on day 3, and stood back looking at that leaning back fence on day 5, like it had personally offended me. I was in the middle of debating the fence when I heard her. "You know," Dot said from her side of the yard, not looking up from the book in her lap, "that fence has been leaning since 2019. The Hendersons argued about who was supposed to fix it for 4 years and then just sold the house." I looked at her. "And you never fixed it yourself?" She turned to Paige. "It's not my fence, Gerald." I laughed. Out loud. The kind of laugh that surprises you because you'd forgotten what it felt like to have one ready. "Fair point," I said. She finally looked up over her reading glasses. "The hardware store on Birch Avenue has good lumber. Tell them Dot sent you. Carl gives a discount to people I like." I paused. "How do you know you like me?" "We've spoken twice." She went back to her book. "I know what I know. Now I need you to understand something about Dorothy Pearson before this story goes any further. Because she is not a character, she is a force. 64 years old, retired high school principal. Widowed 5 years ago when her husband, a man named Frank, had a heart attack on a golf course in Arizona, and apparently, according to Dodd, died doing exactly what he loved, which frankly tells you everything about Frank. She said that with a smile that had equal parts grief and affection in it, the kind of smile that takes years to build. She had one daughter in Portland who called every Sunday. She grew tomatoes in raised beds along her back fence with the focus of someone conducting scientific research. She drank her tea strong enough to strip paint, and she had the particular superpower of saying exactly what she thought, without ever being cruel about it. I had never met anyone quite like her, and I want you to stay with me here, because I was not looking for anyone. That is the honest truth. I was not lonely in the way that makes people desperate. I had my coffee, my porch, my fence project, and my peace. I was not searching. But Dot Pearson had a way of simply appearing in your life and rearranging the furniture while you were still deciding whether to let her in. It started with the peach cobbler. Day 9 on Clover Hill Lane. I was on the porch after dinner when she appeared at the bottom of my porch steps, holding a ceramic dish covered in foil like she was delivering evidence. I said I made the best peach cobbler on this street, she announced. I don't make statements I can't back up. I stood and took the dish. It was still warm. You didn't have to do this, I said. I know, she said simply. I wanted to. There's a difference. I want you to hold that line. I know. I wanted to. There's a difference. Because it hit me somewhere behind the sternum and stayed there. Because for the previous 3 years, every act of so-called generosity in my life had come attached to something. An expectation. An invoice. A condition. I invited her to sit. She sat. We talked for 2 hours. I learned that Frank had been quieter than her, which she said was strategically necessary for the survival of the marriage. I told her about Carol, about how she used to reorganize my toolbox when she was anxious about something. So I always knew something was bothering her before she said a word, because my flathead screwdrivers would suddenly be arranged by size. Dot laughed at that, really laughed. That's love, she said, the specific, inconvenient, slightly maddening kind, the kind that leaves marks. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I said, that's exactly what it is. We sat with that for a moment. 2 people who had loved people and lost them, sitting on a porch on Clover Hill Lane, letting the quiet be comfortable instead of empty. Then she stood up, straightened her cardigan, and said, the cobbler dish is mine. I expect it back clean. Yes, ma'am, I said. She walked back across the yard. I looked down at the dish in my hands and realized I was still smiling. By week 3, we had a routine, though neither of us had discussed having one. That's the thing about natural rhythms. They establish themselves without a meeting. Morning coffee on our respective porches, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in a comfortable parallel. She'd call across the yard, Gerald, did you eat a real breakfast, or did you do the toast and stubbornness thing again? And I'd call back, I had eggs, Dorothy. I am a grown man. And she'd say, scrambled doesn't count as cooking. On Thursdays, she went to a book club she described as 4 women and an enormous amount of wine pretending to discuss literature. On Saturdays, I went to the farmer's market 2 blocks over and started, without fully realizing it, buying 2 things. 2 bunches of kale, 2 jars of honey, 2 bags of the dark roast coffee that she had mentioned, once, casually, that she preferred. She never pointed this out. She just accepted the coffee the first time I handed it over the fence and said, You're not as oblivious as you look, Gerald. But here's where the story shifts, because I need you to stay with me now. It was a Wednesday evening, week 3. I was replacing the last section of the back fence, because that fence had been bothering me since day 5, and I am not a man who tolerates unfinished business. When my phone rang. Marcus. I looked at the screen for a long moment. We hadn't spoken since moving day, since neither did she in his driveway. I almost let it ring out. Almost. I answered. Marcus. His voice was different, tighter, like something had been wound too many times. Hey, Dad, you got a minute? I'm fixing a fence, I said. So talk while I work. A pause. How are you settling in? Fine, I said. How are you? Another pause. Longer this time. It's been a rough few weeks, Dad. Not because I was done, but because I know my son's voice, and his voice was telling me that whatever came next was going to require both my hands free. What happened? I said. And that's when he told me. The company Marcus worked for, a mid-sized logistics firm he'd been with for 11 years, had been quietly restructuring since January. He'd known it was coming. He hadn't told Tanya. He hadn't told me. He'd been carrying it alone the way Baymont men unfortunately tend to do. And 2 weeks after I moved out, the restructuring reached his department. He was laid off on a Monday morning. I'm sorry, son, I said, and I meant it. Whatever had happened between us, and plenty had, that was my boy. His pain was still my pain. That doesn't switch off. We're okay for now, he said quickly. Too quickly. I have some severance pay. I'm looking. It's just... He stopped. Just what? I said. Silence. Tanya wants to reach out to you, he finally said. She wanted me to ask if If maybe we could all have dinner, the three of us. I picked up my hammer again. I'll think about it, I said. Dad. I said I'll think about it, Marcus. That's what I've got right now. I hung up. Stood there in my backyard, with the half-finished fence and the last of the evening light going orange through the oak trees. From next door, quiet, steady, completely unhurried, Dot's voice came over the fence. You okay over there? I thought about it honestly, which is something she had already made me better at doing in 3 short weeks. I don't know yet, I said. A pause. Then, cobbler, and despite everything, Marcus, Tanya, the job, the dinner invitation, the whole impossible, complicated weight of family, I laughed. Yeah, I said, cobbler sounds about right. What I didn't know yet, what none of us knew, was that Tanya's request for dinner had nothing to do with missing me. It had everything to do with what was coming. And what was coming was going to force every single one of us to decide what we were actually made of. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So, thank you for real. There are moments in life that arrive quietly, no drums, no warning, and then detonate everything around you. This was one of them. But before I get to the dinner, I need to tell you what happened the morning before it. It was a Saturday, farmer's market Saturday. I had just come back with my 2 bags, yes, still 2 of everything, don't judge me, and I was unloading on the kitchen counter when I heard a knock at my front door. Not Dot. Dot never knocked at the front. She hollered from the yard like a reasonable person. I opened the door. Tanya was standing on my porch, alone. No Marcus, no warning, just Tanya, in a gray coat I'd never seen before, holding her purse strap with both hands the way people do when they need something to hold on to. I stared at her. She stared at me. Gerald, she said. Tanya, I said. A pause long enough to park a truck in. Marcus doesn't know I'm here, she said. I leaned against the doorframe and folded my arms. Not aggressively, just carefully. Then maybe, I said, you should tell me why you are. She looked past me into the house for a moment, then back at my face. Something in her expression was different from the woman who had sat across from me at that kitchen table, with her folded hands and her board meeting energy. That woman had been armored. This one looked like the armor had been failing for weeks and she was exhausted from holding it together. Can I come in? She said. I'll get coffee. We sat in the 2 porch chairs I had bought at an estate sale the second week, because 2 chairs felt right even before I fully understood why, and Tanya wrapped both hands around her mug and looked out at the oak trees for a long moment before she spoke. I need you to know, she said slowly, that I am not here to ask you for money. All right, I said. I mean it, Gerald. I know that's what you're expecting, and I know I earned that expectation, but that's not why I'm here. I said nothing. I have found, over 67 years, that silence is frequently the most intelligent response available. She took a breath. Marcus doesn't know how bad it is, she said. I mean, he knows about the second mortgage. I went very still. We took it out 18 months ago, she said, and her voice was doing that careful, controlled thing people do when they are one wrong word away from falling apart completely. The business I was trying to launch, the online retail thing I told Marcus was going well. Was it not going well? I said. She laughed. One short, hollow sound. It collapsed in 4 months. I lost $60,000, and I have been quietly moving money around ever since, trying to keep Marcus from seeing it. And now, with the layoff, she stopped, set her mug down, pressed her fingers against her eyes for a moment. We are 4 months from losing the house. The oak trees rustled. A car passed slowly on Clover Hill Lane. I looked at this woman who had sat across from me with folded hands and told me to hand over my savings or get out. And I felt something I was not expecting to feel. Not satisfaction. Not vindication. Something closer to grief. Now I need you to stay with me, because this is the part of the story that matters most. I thought about Carol, about how she used to reorganize my toolbox when she was scared about something she hadn't told me yet. About the specific, maddening, deeply human tendency to turn fear into control, to grab at whatever is nearest when the ground starts moving under your feet. Tanya had been scared for 18 months, and instead of saying so, she had looked at the 67-year-old man in the spare room, at his savings account, at his quiet routines and his fixed faucets, and she had grabbed. That didn't make what she did right, but it made it human. "Why are you telling me this?" I said carefully. "And not Marcus?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Because I don't know how to," she said finally. "And because—" She stopped again, started again. "Because I think you're the only one who will tell me the truth about what I should do. Marcus loves me too much to be honest right now. And I don't have anyone else." That last sentence landed differently than she probably intended it to, because I heard what was underneath it. Not manipulation, not strategy, just a woman who had been carrying something enormous alone for far too long, on a porch she had no real right to be on, asking a man she had wronged to help her find her footing. I picked up my coffee, drank slowly, set it down. "You have to tell him," I said. She flinched. "All of it," I said. "The business, the second mortgage, the 60,000, all of it, tonight, before that dinner. Gerald, Tanya." I turned and looked at her directly. "You asked me for the truth. That's the truth. The only thing worse than the hole you're in is letting your husband keep standing next to it without knowing it's there." She stared at me. Her eyes were bright in the particular way that means someone is refusing to cry through sheer willpower alone. "And after I tell him?" she said. "That's between you and Marcus," I said. "But you come to that dinner having already told him. That's the condition." "What condition?" she said. "The condition," I said, "for me being at that dinner at all." She left an hour later. I sat on the porch alone for a while. The oak trees were doing their slow, indifferent thing. The neighborhood was quiet and golden in the way that late Saturday mornings get in early spring. Dot appeared at the fence with a trowel in one hand, because of course she did. "Saw a woman on your porch," she said, not looking up from her tomato beds. "My daughter-in-law," I said. She turned a patch of soil. "How'd that go?" I thought about it honestly, as she had already taught me to do. "Better than expected," I said. "Worse than hoped." She nodded slowly. "That's most of life, Gerald." "Yeah," I said. "I'm starting to think you're right about that." She looked up then, just briefly, the way she did when she was deciding whether to say the next thing. "You're a good man," she said, simply, the way someone states a fact about weather or geography. And then she went back to her tomatoes. I sat with that for a long time. The dinner was Sunday evening. Marcus opened the door when I knocked, and the first thing I noticed was his eyes. Red-rimmed. Tired in the way that comes from a conversation that strips everything down to the frame. He had clearly been told. He pulled me into a hug before I could say a word. A real one. The kind that lasts 4 or 5 seconds longer than regular hugs, and says everything that can't be organized into sentences. "Dad," he said into my shoulder. "I know," I said. Dinner was quiet at first. Tanya had made pot roast, Carol's favorite, which I chose to believe was intentional. And we sat around the table, the three of us, in the particular silence of people who have already said the big things and are now figuring out what the ordinary ones sound like again. Then Tanya set down her fork and looked at me. "I owe you an apology," she said. "A real one. Not a dinner table smooth things over one. A real one." I looked at her. "What I said to you," she continued, and her voice was steady, but it cost her something. "In that kitchen, that was wrong. You had done nothing but give, and I talked to you like you were a problem to be managed. And I am sorry. Genuinely." The table was quiet. Marcus was looking at his plate. I took a breath. "I appreciate that," I said. "I do, and I forgive you, Tanya, because holding on to it doesn't help any of us." She nodded, exhaled. "But," I said, and both of them looked up, "I won't be moving back in. That chapter is closed." Not out of anger. Just, I found something on Clover Hill Lane I didn't know I was missing, and I'm not ready to give it up. Marcus looked at me curiously. "Found something like, what?" And I thought about Dot Pearson in her yellow cardigan on a rocking chair I almost missed in the dark. Her ceramic cobbler dish delivered like evidence. Her strong opinions about lawn maintenance in her Saturday tomatoes, and the specific, grounded, unhurried way she moved through the world like someone who had already survived the worst and come out the other side with good posture and better recipes. "Peace," I said, which was true. And also not the whole answer, which Marcus, to his credit, seemed to understand, because he looked at me for a moment, then smiled. Small and tired and genuine. "Good, Dad," he said quietly. "I'm glad." We talked for 3 hours, about the house, the mortgage, the options. I did not write a check. I did not rescue anyone that evening. But I helped Marcus make a list of the right calls to make, the right people to contact, the right sequence of steps for two people standing at the edge of a very serious situation who needed someone to help them see it clearly instead of panic into it. That I could do. That cost me nothing but time and experience. When I left, Tanya hugged me at the door. Stiff at first, she is not a natural hugger, which honestly I respect. And then something in her shoulders dropped and it became a real one. "Thank you," she said. "Take care of my son," I said. "I will," she said. And I believed her. I drove home to Clover Hill Lane with the windows down and the spring air coming through cold and clean. Dot's porch light was on. She was in her rocking chair, tea in hand, yellow cardigan, 9:30 on a Sunday evening, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. I got out of the car and stood at the bottom of my porch steps for a moment. "How was dinner?" she called across. "Complicated," I said. And then, "Good." She nodded like that made complete sense. "That's family," she said. "Yeah," I said. I looked over at her for a moment. The oak trees, the quiet street, the porch light throwing a warm circle around her chair. Dot. You want to have coffee tomorrow morning, not across the yard. Actually, here, or yours. Doesn't matter. A pause. She tilted her head slightly, considered it with the same serious attention she gave her tomato beds and her strong opinions. "Mine," she said finally. "My coffee is better." "It really is," I admitted. She smiled. "The real one. The one that took years to build." 7:30, she said. "Don't be late." I went inside, sat on the edge of my bed, picked up Carol's photo from the nightstand, the way I did every night, and held it for a moment. "I'm okay," I told her. "I'm actually really okay." I set the photo down gently, and for the first time in a long time, I meant every word. Some people will only respect you the moment you stop needing them. But here's what I didn't know when this started. The moment you stop needing them is also the moment you find out exactly what you're worth. And sometimes, 12 minutes across town, on a quiet street lined with oak trees, with a woman in a yellow cardigan who makes the best peach cobbler you've ever tasted, you find out you were worth a whole lot more than you ever gave yourself credit for. Gerald Beaumont, 67 years old, and finally, completely, entirely home. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere.